Having a NAS is just an easy way of storing files locally, and personally I think most households should have one. I recently went to a friend's house and they just had a thing in the corner that they knew they could store files easily to, but they didn't even know it was called a NAS. It stops you having to plug in a USB drive each time and move that drive between devices whenever you want to access your data. I added the NAS to their phone too so that they could easily access their files without going onto their laptop each time. And these days, a NAS isn't just a NAS, it's a full-blown computer. And with the specs of this UGREEN NAS, even an avid HomeLabber would find a use for this. As well as hosting your files, it could become your media server, it could even become the brain of your smart home running Home Assistant. So let's have a look at it in a bit more detail. So if you want to buy a NAS, then you could either go the route of buying one like this one, or you could go the do-it-yourself route, and you could use something like an old tower PC, or even the increasingly popular mini PCs, and that's what I use for my fairly janky TrueNAS setup that I have at the moment. But a DIY NAS is a project in itself. Oh man. You've got to do the research, you've got to then buy all the parts, you've got to build it, and then you've probably got to go on forums to learn the software and figure out all of its quirks. You also often have to end up making compromises like high power consumption because you've used an old PC, or you decided that using a mini PC was a good idea and so you've ended up with USB storage, or maybe yours is perfect, but you spent a ton of money doing it, in which case maybe buying a NAS was the best option. Firstly, as far as NASes go, this is a good looking NAS and it doesn't seem to attract fingerprints either, which is great. And secondly, it's worth mentioning that UGREEN did send me this NAS to review, and one of the reasons I was interested in it is because of 10 gigabit networking. Now you might be thinking, we can't saturate 10 gigabit with 4 hard drives. Maybe you might get close with SSDs, but the reason it's got it is because this actually supports 2 NVMe drives as well. And in fact, there's actually a third NVMe drive slot, which has the operating system on it. So in this video, we're going to discuss some of the hardware specs of this NAS, take a look at some of the software features of the OGOS operating system, and then we're going to see what it's like running Home Assistant and virtual machines on it. As well as this NAS feeling really solid and well built, the I/O on this machine is quite decent, with a USB-A port, a USB-C port on the front, both running at 10 gigabit, and on the back there's 5 gigabit USB port and 2 USB 2 ports, which is mainly for peripherals really, because as you can see this actually has an HDMI port on it as well, which you can use for playing media directly from the NAS. It also has a micro SD card slot on the front, which I think is quite a nice touch for being able to transfer files from things like your camera. As well as the 10 gigabit NIC, which I mentioned earlier, it also has a 2.5 gigabit network port. The processor is a fairly capable Intel Pentium Gold 8505, which has 1 hyper-threaded performance core and 4 efficiency cores, which makes 10 gigabit file transfers really comfortable whilst having headroom for running things like other apps. The NAS comes with 8 GB of DDR5 SO-DIMM RAM, which is fine for normal operations, but a bit on the low side for fast large file transfers, and definitely not enough for running any serious virtual machines. Thankfully they've provided a second RAM slot, and if you swap out the original RAM stick then you can go all the way up to 64 GB, which really makes a difference to the performance of the device. Before getting it up and running, you of course need to install the hard drives, and this is really simple because of the toolless caddies. In my case I'm using 4 4TB IronWolf drives, which UGREEN kindly sent me with the unit so I could properly test it. You just slide out the caddy, release the little catch, put the hard drive in, squeeze it together and slide it back into the NAS until you hear that satisfying click sound. With the NAS powered on, I found that the power consumption of my HomeLab went from an average of about 113 watts to 153 watts. So it seems that the 4 hard drives, 1 NVMe drive, plus a boot drive, plus 2 RAM sticks, for this NAS uses about 40 watts or so. If your NAS isn't used all of the time, then you could take advantage of the drive spinning down, which might save you 20 or so watts. You can actually set this device to fully shut down and start up again on a schedule automatically, or even use Wake-On-LAN functionality. When it came to the setup of the NAS, I found it very straightforward and seems to have most of the options that a normal NAS user would want. You can easily create users, add them to user groups, assign them to your shared folders. One of the first things that was immediately obvious is how snappy the interface is. Now, I don't know if this will slow down over time, but it's really responsive, and the apps down the left-hand side make intuitive sense to me. I did the setup from a web browser, but they also have a mobile app which seems to have most of the same features. I played a media file from the mobile app and it worked great. When setting up the storage for the first time, I was impressed with the options available, and it gives user-friendly information for each one rather than cryptic technobabble. I didn't go with the recommended RAID 5 though, and instead opted for RAID 10 for both more redundancy and performance. I'm not going to go through all of the software features, but here are a few that are worth noting. There's a network section and it supports link aggregation, so if you don't have 10 gigabit networking, then you might want to combine the two NICs together to get either 2 gigabits or even 5 gigabits. It does also support SMB Multichannel, so make sure that you enable that because it's not enabled by default. And if you really want to get geeky, then you can of course enable SSH to access your NAS via a terminal. For most of the features, you're going to want to go into the App Center. Now, there aren't a ton of apps available, but in my opinion it has most of the important ones. The first ones you're going to want to install are Sync and Backup and Snapshot. The Snapshot app allows you to take automatic snapshots so that you can recover your data if you accidentally delete a file or if you get a ransomware attack. A nice simple feature that they've added here is that when you restore a snapshot, it actually takes another snapshot so that if you accidentally overwrite new data, then you can restore that as well. And the Sync and Backup app is where you want to go if you want to back up all of your NAS data to another location. If you have the luxury of having two UGREEN NASes, then you can back up between them. Otherwise, it has the option of backing up to another storage volume on the same NAS. If you do this, then make sure that you're actually backing up to another storage pool, otherwise your data isn't any safer. And if you install the desktop software, then you can automatically sync your files to your NAS. And finally, if you install the Cloud Drives app, then you can sync your files to either Google Drive or OneDrive. You can also connect another SMB share to this NAS. To do this, just go to the Files app and then connect to a network folder. This could be really helpful if you're moving all of your data from another PC onto the NAS for the first time. And speaking of SMB, the file copy speeds were pretty decent. Read and write speeds were around 300 megabytes, which is what you'd expect from spinning disks without caching. And with NVMe drives as a read cache, I was able to get the full 10 gigabits. I didn't have two spare NVMe drives though, so I couldn't test the write caching. But instead, I set up the NVMe drive as a new storage pool, and I was getting write speeds of about 700 megabytes per second, which is not full 10 gigabit speed, but I seem to get this quite a lot on my other 10 gigabit devices. So I seem to think it's something on my network or maybe my SFP devices rather than the actual NAS itself, particularly as I did manage to get 10 gigabit read speeds with the read cache. There's also a Photos app which can do some basic local AI detection. I added a couple of pictures of me, and after a few minutes it did identify me as a person. The feature that is my favourite here though is that you can actually have your pictures show up on a map of the location where you took the photo if you've got the metadata stored of your GPS location against those pictures. I found this really cool. You can also train a custom model, which I haven't tried yet, but sounds useful if it works well. Now let's get on to the geeky stuff. You can create Docker containers and virtual machines, which basically means you can run whatever you want on this NAS, particularly as the VMs do support USB pass-through. The main thing I wanted to install was running Home Assistant on it. To install the Docker version, it's as simple as going to the App Center and pressing Install next to Home Assistant. It took just over 5 minutes to install both Docker and Home Assistant. Just bear in mind that the Docker version version of Home Assistant doesn't give you access to the add-on store. I also found that the Home Assistant version was a month behind the official release, which is not the end of the world, but worth noting. As you can see, it discovered plenty of the devices on my network without a problem, and I considered it to be working as expected. I do find Home Assistant add-ons quite important though, because they enable easy integration of Matter devices, as well as local speech-to-text and text-to-speech functionality. So with that in mind, I created a virtual machine running Home Assistant OS to see if that would work okay. And about 10 to 15 minutes later, I had a VM of Home Assistant fully up and running. There was one thing I did notice, and that was that device discovery wasn't working properly. After doing some digging, I found out that this was due to the network bridge type that UGOS uses by default. So if you want to allow your VMs to have full access to your NAS and to other VMs, then you'll want to make a couple of changes in the settings. In UGOS, go to Control Panel, Network Connection, Network Bridging, Virtual Bridging, and then enable it. Then go back to the virtual machine app and press Manage, and then Network, and then in there you want to set VNet Bridge to a Linux bridge. Once you've done that, then your VM should have full connectivity. And as you can see here in Home Assistant, I was able to discover everything again. I also tried USB Passthrough for a Sonoff dongle, and it showed up in Home Assistant successfully. So I guess the question is has this NAS found a permanent place in my HomeLab? And the answer is, well, absolutely yes. But I haven't fully decided on its role yet. I'm not sure whether to install TrueNAS on it or actually just leave UGOS on it, because it does do most of the things that I use my NAS for and will allow me to easily spin up VMs or containers. It does seem a bit of a waste to use this powerful machine just as a NAS, so I haven't ruled out running Proxmox on it, adding it to my existing cluster, and maybe even virtualizing TrueNAS. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on this NAS and your experiences if you have one already. Well, that's it for today, so thanks, until next time.